alive, alive, artist to art, a photographer's portrait with Kelly Burgess coming on soon. I'm Aaron Jack, and this is Artist to Art. So welcome, 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 welcome. Let's breathe together and enjoy the day and smile because we're here together. Thank you. Here's Kelly in a minute. Thank you for joining. Hey.
Hello.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm well. A beautiful day. How's Vermont looking?
It was a little rainy, but it clears up every day around 5 o'clock for some reason. So now it's like sunny and humid.
Wow. So it's
My
kind of like
cat
in
just
and
came to
out.
say
You got
hello.
the sunny, you got the humid. Oh, what's your
A
cat's
little bit of
name?
everything. Her name's Freya. Look at her.
Oh yeah. Aw,
Yeah.
she's so cute.
Yeah, living her best life.
Perfect. That's awesome. So tell me a little bit about yourself. Where are you and you're in Vermont. We just talked about that, but how did you end up there? Like, yeah.
So
How did you end up there?
so I'm from Connecticut originally, and I moved up to Boston in 2006 to go to college, and then stayed there for 12 years and finished my MFA in 2018, and then like ended a really bad relationship around that same time. So I made um, this like snap decision to move to Vermont. I had done a 3-week job there, and I was like, okay, this seems nice, and then literally up and moved the next month. So I've been here ever since.
Wow. So
Yeah.
snap decisions and all of a sudden your life changed.
Yeah, so I have been trying to like make more intuitive decisions instead of like belaboring over them. I'm not very decisive. So I've been trying to like listen to my gut, and my gut was like, move to Vermont. And I was like, okay. And so I did.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. So that's been like 2 years now almost, right?
Yeah, September 2018 is when I got here. So yeah,
Wow.
almost 2 years exactly.
So how's that experience of Vermont been?
It's been different for sure. So I, lived in a city for 12 years, and I'm in a fairly rural location now. So having to adjust to that type of living has been, I wouldn't say difficult, but it's definitely been different. I miss food delivery like passionately. But other than that, I like the slower pace of living. I like that there's no traffic. Boston traffic is notoriously terrible, and the rumors are true. um, so it's been nice. It's like beautiful here year round. It's been pretty good.
Wow. And so how has COVID and all this quarantine affected you, given that you are in a very rural area?
Yeah, it actually hasn't been as bad as I anticipated when it first started. I worked from home before this happened, and so it's kind of just like business as usual for me, with the added like spice of danger every time I go to the grocery store. So,
I
so
like how you
it's
call it a spice.
so it hasn't been too bad. Vermont is actually doing the best in the United States for COVID cases. So things are loosening up a little bit here. I can go out to dinner, eat outside again. Um, and it's not, I miss my friends, but it's not been too bad.
And so I just want to say thank you for being a part of the Showfield's creation that I've been putting together with all of these amazing photographers and participating. And now I want to, so that's 5 p.m. on Tuesday, the 25th of August, 2020, this very strange year that we're in. So tell me a little bit about these other projects that you're involved in, because it seems like you're involved in some really cool projects.
Yeah, so since moving up to Vermont, I feel like I've diversified what I'm doing a little bit more. So I'm still a photographer, but in January 2019, I started working for Castleton University, and I've been their gallery coordinator since then. So it's basically booking shows, talking to artists, installation, promotion, all of that. And this is actually the first time I've worked in a gallery. So it's been a learning experience, especially in a college. That comes with its own unique set of interesting things to deal with.
Wow.
Yeah, and then just recently, I have teamed up with the Too Tired Project. My friend Tara brought me on as their curatorial director, and so we are. That particular project is a photography initiative that brings to light people struggling with mental health issues and sort of celebrating what comes out of that photographically. And so I'm holding a call for entry for a new show that'll be online. So check that
Cool.
out.
So cool.
Yeah.
So cool, so tired all at the same time.
I know, so tired.
So awake, so tired, so alive. Let's check out some work here.
All right.
I'd like to start off with this picture.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So that one I made on a road trip through Nebraska a couple years ago. I was in grad school, and during the summer I quit my full-time job. So for 7 years I had been working in higher ed in admin, and so completely quit. I had broken up with the same person that I had broken up with the last several times. And so I did what I always do, and I hit the road. Like, that's the way that I deal with things, is just to like pick up and go. And so I was on the road for 3 weeks, and I drove from Boston to Colorado, and then up through Wyoming and Montana, and then back down through the Dakotas. And during that time I was making, I don't know, that was kind of the start of when I was making work like much more intuitively than I had been in a while. And so, I was heartbroken and sad, and I ended up making all of these photos that sort of encapsulated that feeling, except for this one. This one I feel like is the outlier in that project, and so it ended up getting cut. And because it was just so beautiful, and it was a reminder to me to slow down and appreciate the beautiful things in life again. And so kind of in the wake of COVID, I've been trying to do that a lot more, and just make work when my gut tells me to. Like, when I see something, I'll react immediately and then take the picture. And so this photo, even though I made it a couple years ago, it sort of has become like the catalyst for a different way of thinking about making work.
And it seems like you found some beauty inside of that. Like, how does that relate to this time?
I think it's really, really hard to kind of escape all the doom scrolling that we're all doing. Like, it's just, I'll go from Instagram to Facebook to Twitter to TikTok, and it's like everything is horrible. And and it's so easy to get caught up in that and like let it bleed into your day-to-day life. And I think for me, being able to, like go for a walk or look at the way the light is hitting a wall, like stopping and really appreciating those moments kind of helps bring me out of the constant sense of dread that we are all currently living in.
So it sounds to me like there is a level of like gratitude, appreciation. Like, what is that more specifically? I mean, that's just what I'm hearing, but I feel like it may be more nuanced for you.
So I think for me personally, I used to make work very intuitively. Specifically before I ended up going to art school, I was very much a reactionary photographer. So I would not set out with anything particular in mind. I would just see something and I would take a picture. And after I went to school for photography, I ended up thinking about the way I make work like much more academically. And, like having a project set out in the beginning, and then only making work if it fit within the parameters of whatever project I had made. And I started to lose a little bit of the joy in making pictures, um, because I really used to love like taking my camera everywhere and seeing something that didn't necessarily fit within a particular project. Um, and so I've been actively working to try to get back to that place. And so, like, building a framework from the academic place that I was at and being able to critically think about my work and like where it lands in history and where it lands right now, but also just like doing it for the joy of it. I feel like so many of us forget that part. And so I'm like actively trying to get back to it.
That's beautiful. That's and that's beautiful how it's helped you get back there. It's like through the work has helped you find that place. Do you find that like what's that balance between like finding that between like, oh, you're photographing it and then you're looking through and editing or culling through, like what's that balance for you in finding that joy and that love of life?
It's been, I think, a little half and half. Like some of it I've been working towards like a project that has structure to it. And so I like will specifically go out with the intention of, making work that fits within the parameter. And I am a person that has like a very structured point in me, but I'm also a type of person who like reacts very intuitively and I'm very emotional. And so like finding the balance between those two things so that all of me is feeling fulfilled by the fact that I'm making work, it's been difficult to find that balance. But if I do both of those things, if I have a structured project and I'm also, just taking pictures just for the hell of it whenever I see something beautiful, I find that I'm much more content. So I think, for other people, it's just identifying those things that make you happy, like inside of you, and make you want to pull out a camera when you see it. Like identifying that and seeing if it makes you feel fulfilled. And if not, what is missing? And then kind of building off of that.
Let's take a look at some of the other work
Sure.
that you've got going on. So some of it might be cropped, so you can always say like, move on.
All right.
It's Instagram. Instagram is a moving target.
Yeah, anything that Instagram says we do. So.
Right. Yeah, such is social media in the world that we live in.
Yes, absolutely. Have you gotten on TikTok yet? It's like draining my brain. I love it.
I was on for a second and then I got off and then I had the app and then I didn't. And now I'm interested in this Instagram Reels, which is basically TikTok for Instagram. Just because there's people that are following and then I'm like, okay, like, and yeah, so I'm kind of interested in that. What about you? Have you found have you created for TikTok?
I have, but it's usually just like funny videos of Freya the cat. So it's not like me actually making anything, but I found that their algorithm is probably the best that I've seen. So once you start liking things, it just like keeps pumping out more of that, and it seems very nuanced. And so, like one person might have all videos of people, doing weird dances, but mine is like existential millennial humor and cats, and like I've been following the saga about NYU students going back to school and the food that they've been delivered because they're all quarantined. So I don't know, TikTok just like knows what I want and delivers it to me like straight.
Wow. That's that's really, how do you feel about that?
I mean, in a like day-to-day instant basis, I love it because I'm like, none of us can go anywhere. So I'm just like lying on the couch, like endlessly scrolling. And so that's nice. But when I like start to think about how they're developing this algorithm and like what information it's gleaning from me through like my browsing habits and all of that stuff. I mean, it's slightly concerning, but I try not to think about it too much because like I have an iPhone, so they're already tracking me. So
Oh, what's
anyway,
yeah, yeah, no, that's a topic. That's a
it
topic
is
and
a
a half.
topic.
Like how, you know, what's where do we draw the lines?
Yeah.
Really, like, and where do we draw the lines is like as also creating the imagery.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Where do those end up in space once they're out there? Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. What's going on here? What's
So this was an image I made at a residency that I did a couple years ago in Indiana. And I went straight from grad school directly to this residency pretty much. And um, I think this experience at this residency probably also helped push me to move to Vermont. So I, like left from the city and I drove to Indiana, and I was staying in a farmhouse with three other artists, and it was just like being able to see the fireflies at night and like watch the sunset and have the moon rise over the meadow. I was like, oh, there's like all of this part of life that I'm missing out on that I didn't even know I was missing out on. Like being able to walk through a field and just appreciate the way that light was falling on, a plant on the side of the path was not something that I was doing a lot of in Boston. It was just like nonstop, taking on 1,000 responsibilities, going all the time. Um, and so being able to slow down for those 2 weeks was very helpful for me.
wow? Have you done many residencies?
That is the only one that I've done. I always tell myself that I'm going to apply to more and then somehow manage to like not fill out the applications. So, and then now it's a pandemic. So where can I go?
Yeah, yeah, I understand. The first residency that I had was then postponed because of the pandemic. So
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
I was supposed to be doing some travel related photo things this year. So I was with Photo Filmic. I was supposed to do a seminar with Stephen Shore, and that ended up getting postponed. And then I was supposed to be in Montana a couple months ago. That got postponed. So everything's on hold right now for the most part.
hmm. What's going on here?
So this is another image that I made at that residency. I spent probably the first week not really making any work while I was there. I was just kind of like absorbing the space around me. And I spent a lot of time by myself reading and just kind of wandering through this old farmhouse and observing how it changed when the light changed. And so like every window had these like beautiful gauzy curtains over it. And so as, the sun shifted in the sky, the light in each room was like so beautiful. And so it was really kind of just an exercise in observing what's around me. That happened to be what's around me. So this one I made a couple weeks before I picked up and moved to Vermont. So I was in Vermont for 3 weeks in the summer of 2018, and I was doing a job at Bennington College. And again, I was like in a farmhouse in the meadow, like all by myself for 3 weeks. And I found that my body was changing with the more time I spent outside. And so like I would wake up when the sun came up, and there were like all of these birds and rabbits and chipmunks and deer that would like come out of the forest every morning. It was like living in a Disney movie. And this image in particular is probably one of the ones that made me go like, oh, I could live this life every single day. Like I don't have to live in Boston anymore. And it was, I think, a turning point for me in terms of realizing that I was very unhappy, and I'd probably been unhappy for a really long time, but I had, I was just in the grind. And so you don't have time to stop and think about if you're happy or not. You just like keep plodding along. Um, and this kind of afforded me the opportunity to question where I was living and why I was living there and like what people were in my life. And so it kind of, for me, is representative of like, I mean, like it is what it is, like the light coming through the trees and kind of like illuminating all of the stuff that I hadn't even thought about myself before.
Hmm. That's beautiful. That's a beautiful like metaphorical version of like the light. Yeah, it's just a beautiful metaphor that you've got going
Thanks.
on here. I appreciate
So this, all of these that we're looking at right now are all from the same project, and it's it's more, like slowing down and appreciating the light around me and just like watching how different elements of the universe are interacting with each other. And I think my way of making pictures changed a lot when I moved to Vermont. Um, in some ways it's still the same. Like I think I've always been taking pictures of light on things, and that's probably my favorite thing to photograph is just light, like how light falls on objects. But once I came to Vermont, I think the way that I started doing it had changed a lot and became a lot more nuanced and contemplative. So I've been trying to just like keep slowing down. Thank you
it.
for all the messages that
Yeah,
are being
and
sent also right now.
yeah, and if anybody has any questions down in the comments, so feel free to ask some questions or say or put more emojis down there. So it's an open conversation here. We're all in this together.
Yeah.
What's
This
going on?
particular image, this is in my town that I live in right now. And I am surrounded by rivers. Vermont has so many rivers. I don't, like, I'm from New England, but I don't think I realized just how jam-packed with rivers Vermont was until I got here. And even though it's a landlocked state, I'm just surrounded by water all the time. And so I spend a lot of time just kind of like hanging out by the river and just watching things change. Um, so that's what this is, just watching the light fall in the water.
Hmm. Thanks, Vivian, for the little exploding stars there.
Yes, more emojis. I'm very pro emoji, so
Yeah, right. I love them.
me too. Oh, this one's brand new.
Oh,
Um, yeah, so all of these are from the project that I've been working on, sort of. It's like early enough that it hasn't really been realized in terms of like I don't have an artist statement or anything like that, and like it's not on my website yet, and it's just they all kind of just live in my brain and my computer for right now. Um, but all of this work is about slowing down and appreciating the beauty around me and taking pictures for the joy of taking pictures. I feel like a lot of the work that I do is from a very personal place, and usually it's something bad that has happened to me that has like made me like push me to make work. Um, and so it's nice to just like get out and be like, wow, this tree looks beautiful. I'm gonna make a photo. Um, I think, especially in contemporary photography, that is lost a lot. Um, just like joy for joy's sake, or beauty for beauty's sake.
hmm.
When I first moved up to Vermont, I went like super extreme. So I went from living in a city to moving to like a 3 bedroom, 2 bathroom house in the middle of a meadow, like in the middle of nowhere, like 3 miles up a dirt road, no neighbors. I just like really went for it. And so I spent so much time by myself, like absolutely 100% isolated, in with this idea that I just gonna like really think about what I appreciated in my life and what I didn't want in my life anymore, and kind of like put myself back together a little bit. And so I would spend hours just like sitting around and waiting for things to happen. And I happened to be sitting on the couch one night watching a movie, and it was like foggy all the time, all the time. And I noticed that when a car went by, like, every half an hour or so, just the way that the trees were illuminated was so beautiful. And so I trudged outside. It was like raining and foggy and cold. And I just stood outside until I made the photo that I wanted to make. And it was just so nice to be able to slow myself down enough to take that. So all of this has been like an exercise in slowing down.
Wow. That's certainly impressive coming from Boston to this very, it seems you got some ups and ends of the spectrum there.
Yeah, I I decided to go for it. I just decided to go for it. I'd like ended a long-term abusive relationship, and I was making a lot of work based on my experiences within that relationship. And so I felt like I lost a part of myself over the years. And by isolating myself and really spending time just like making decisions about my life, it was very lonely, but incredibly helpful.
Hmm.
So this image is from my most recent body of work. The body of work is called I Know, I Know, and um, it's kind of about my experience moving to Vermont. So moving into an isolated area and becoming more self-sufficient, and kind of like not leaning on the people that I leaned on before, and putting my life back together. So all the images that I've made for this project have corresponding text to go with them, um, that I wrote. It's kind of a narrative about my life told in a way that it doesn't feel like you don't necessarily need to know me to know that it's about my life. Um, and so when I moved up to Vermont, I basically had no survival skills whatsoever, because I lived in the city. So what did I need to know how to build a fire for? But I learned how to build a fire. I can successfully fire build now. That is one of them.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. And one of the things that I love the most about living here is driving on all of our dirt roads at night and just everything being illuminated by the headlights. And I love driving, so a lot of my work is travel based, or road trip based. And just like riding in the summer with the windows down and the noise of all the bugs and the frogs, it is something else. It's like so beautiful to me. And I think imagery wise, it ends up looking like so desolate and so lonely, but it's such a joyful experience to me. So it's interesting for me to like have that internal experience and then be making this outward, like something that looks the exact opposite of what I'm feeling.
Interesting. Do you ever stop and get out, or is this like, are you taking them from your car, or how do you approach the photograph when you're finding this?
I don't often get out. I'm usually taking them from my car. I'm usually taking them while driving. So I don't recommend that. Anyone who's watching right now, don't take photos while driving. But I shoot with a Sony mirrorless camera. And so I've kind of perfected the art of like still looking at the road and still holding the steering wheel and just kind of like holding my camera and like pointing it out the window or pointing it out the windshield in front of me. Um, so it's sometimes I'll stop if I see something on the side of the road, but for the most part, I'm taking them while I'm in the car. Like that's part of the experience for me, is being in the car. Um, I've been driving since I was 16, and I think when I got my license and I got my first car, it represented being able to like go anywhere that I wanted, and it was a certain amount of independence that I was previously unfamiliar with. And ever since then, I'll get in my car if I'm upset about something and I'll go for a ride. Or, I'll drive across the country if I'm, having a bad breakup or something like that. It's kind of like ritualistic for me in a sense.
Hmm. So, in a way, this relates to that ritual in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. I spent a lot of time when I first moved here just kind of like driving around. So Vermont has more dirt roads than they have paved roads, which I did not know when I moved here. Um, and so I love going through the back roads and just spending time with myself. And I do a lot of thinking when I'm in the car. Um, and so like going through that kind of helps me process whatever I'm feeling or thinking about.
Hmm. That's beautiful. What's going on here?
So this is one of my plants in my bedroom, kind of like pressed up against the curtain. And this one I made during the pandemic. And so I started to really think about like, how do I make work when I can't actually go anywhere? And so I kind of just like looked around my space and tried to make myself more attuned to like the way the light was changing and the way that my things were interacting with other things and the way my life was interacting with the light, and kind of just like thinking about my life and my experience and making images that reflected what I was going through. Um, so it's been really quiet here in the pandemic. I mean, it's not usually like super crazy here anyway, but I spent a lot like more time with myself than I normally would, and it's been interesting.
So, how were you feeling when you made this or when you look back at this? Because it does speak to this time, it seems, and it was made during this time. So, was there any particular like element that you feel like came out or like that moved you or was moving
Um,
you at the time?
yeah, I think that it captures like the very contained quiet that I have going on here. Or I did before I got a cat anyway. Like I would go days without speaking at all. I wouldn't have any work calls, and it would, I wouldn't have to go to the grocery store, and I just wouldn't talk because I had nobody to talk to really, like verbally. Um, and so I feel like the way that this particular image looks kind of reflects how I felt through a lot of this pandemic, um, like just quiet and kind of self-contained.
Hmm.
So this is a photo that I made right before I moved to Vermont, and this was in the meadow that the house was in that I was staying at over the summer, and it's really just about like looking at the small things in my environment and you know appreciating how the light, like the sunrise, was glinting off a wet spider web covered in dew. Just trying to appreciate the world around me in a way that I hadn't in several years. I made this image in Indiana at that residency, and I started really thinking about um, how things changed in darkness. And so I made a lot of pictures at night or like at dusk, and that has kind of like carried through this whole project that I was working on. And just the way that like the moonlight hit those tiny white flowers was so beautiful to me, and having the ability to capture that in a photograph was important to me. Um, so like thinking about light and darkness and like the contrast between my previous life and the life that I'm living now, um, and like making work in the wake of trauma and how imagery can kind of like go with that. A lot of thinking, a lot of thinking, a lot of walking.
Hmm. And it seems also a lot of driving.
Yes. I'm like getting antsy because I haven't gone anywhere in a while. I was in Florida and New Orleans in February, but I think because I know that I can't go anywhere, I'm like itchy to get out of here. So this was pre-pandemic, and I had found someone who wanted to take a trip with me, and there are like so many vintage pickup trucks here in Vermont. It's like a big thing. I've seen so many old pickup trucks. And so this guy came to pick me up in his like early 90s rusty pickup truck. And we drove to Lake Willoughby. And it was the first time that I had let somebody else drive me since I moved to Vermont. And I was like fascinated with being able to take a picture without having to do it while I drove. So I have like all of these photographs of his windshield, because we were driving into the sun, and just like the way that the light was hitting this like greasy, disgusting windshield was so beautiful. And the fact that I could like take a sharp picture and not crash my car was so exciting to me.
I understand.
Yeah.
I
I had
understand.
like just
Mm-hmm.
started dating for the first time and like going out into the world, and I had been with the previous person for over 8 years, and it was kind of like exploring what it meant to be my own person now and spend my time with other people. So that was part of this, making this image for me.
Wow.
I don't usually take pictures of flowers. I'm not like a big flower person. Um, I appreciate them, but don't frequently buy them. Like all of my plants are non-flowering plants for the most part. But last spring, I went to a greenhouse and I saw this plant with its hanging flowers, and I decided to make a change and buy a flowering plant. It died, but I have this beautiful picture of it. It bloomed very briefly, um, and the way that it was kind of like pushing itself down the wall was really lovely to me. It was like slow movement every day. It would get a little longer and reach a little farther. This is also in my bedroom here where I live now. Um, I This is more of like trying to appreciate the space that I'm in and finding beauty in the small, like everyday things that I, maybe would have overlooked before. Um, or if not overlooked, I would notice it but not take a picture of it necessarily. And so because I'm, trapped indoors most of the time, um, I've started to pay a lot more attention to what's happening around me and playing a little bit with how I capture it. And so this is the result of slightly more playfulness on my part. I'm usually pretty, like, I don't do a lot of experimental anything. My photography is like very straight photography. Um, and so the building that I live in right now is from the like mid 1800s. And so the windows are original and they're all warped and like dirty to the point where like, I can't clean them because it's the outside. And I have a picture that I made before this one where the window is just the window. And for me, I couldn't capture the way the light kind of was shining through the window without taking it out of focus a little bit. And so that's what I tried to do. I tried to make a picture that represented what I was seeing without necessarily taking like a technically good photo. That's more of like still trying to get rid of that academic side of me that is telling myself like you have to make a technically perfect photo, and it has to be like perfectly color balanced, and you can't have too much black and all of that.
Was that from your MFA that you found a lot of that like talk?
Um, it definitely started in my BFA. So I happened to be very, very lucky, and my cohort was amazing when I was doing undergrad. And we were very supportive, and we were a strong knit community, but we were also competitive in the way that we pushed each other. And so it wasn't competitive to be like vindictive or anything like that, but it was competitive that we all pushed each other. And I think during that time, I got it in my head that like a good photograph had to be technically perfect and had to be, had to have this concept behind it that, I couldn't just take a picture because I was taking a picture. It had to have some conceptual something behind it. And I've, and that kind of like continued on through grad school, where it was very important to, have a very strong framework, conceptual framework behind what I was doing, and be able to talk about what I was doing and not just take pictures and bring them to the table and be like, it is what it is, like here it is. But I like being able to do that better now. So I feel like there aren't people that are holding me, not accountable, but that aren't like asking those questions of me, which makes me more free to develop a concept based on the images that I'm making rather than the other way around, and going from concept to photo. So now I think I'm going photo to concept. And I found that if I just allow myself to make work without thinking about it so much, I end up with a project at the end anyway, because, what I'm thinking about is leading me to make this particular set of images. But it usually doesn't reveal itself until I'm farther along in the image making process. To answer the question somebody asked, I do like
Vivian.
Uda Vivian.
Vivian,
Yeah.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I appreciate both ways of making imagery. So I've definitely had successful projects were successful for me in terms of, like coming up with an idea that I wanted to photograph, and then kind of structuring how I wanted to make photos. But it's been a good exercise for me to like loosen up a little bit and allow myself to just kind of take whatever photos or react to the space in the way that I'm reacting, and then put it together later. And I think because I make work that's very personal and it is based on experiences that I'm going through, it tends to lend itself to more reactive photo taking, because then I can just like sit and I can feel whatever, and I can take pictures based on what I feel rather than trying to frame a concept.
Yeah. It seems it's interesting to like be it's interesting that because you're looking it seems to me like you're looking at it because you came from like this very academically rigorous point of view, how you're battling with that, it seems.
Yeah, it's definitely a push and a pull, because I was in school for a very long time, um, studying photography, and I think when you're in an academic setting, there's certain rules in place where, you have to be able to hit X, Y, and Z when you're giving an artist talk, that doesn't allow itself for that more intuitive image making. When I first started grad school, I actually I was so tired of making work based on my own personal experiences. Like I felt super self-centered, and I was like, oh my God, all of these people are going to think I'm like super self-absorbed. And so I'm going to make a project about conservation land, like something more socially relevant that I cared about. And I started making work in a conservation land and ended up making a project about uh, like a women's health issue that I had. And so even when I tried to like push away from that, I still ended up making work about my own experiences. And so I will say that grad school allowed me the space to like try to push away from it, which then kind of, brought me around. And I was like, oh, I don't have to feel bad about this being the way that I work because it's my work. Um, and so now I don't feel as bad as I did.
That's all. I mean, that's good, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of, when I was in grad school, I think I learned how to make work that was about my personal experience, but then leave it open ended enough that other people could access it. And so that it didn't need to be about me necessarily. Like to me, it's about me, but other people looking at it, it doesn't need, like, they don't need to know anything about me. I hope. So this was a photo from my thesis work. And I ended up, um, when I started when I finished my first year of grad school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had just wrapped up a project that year, and I had no idea. I had nothing on deck, and I was stressed. And so I ended up, this was when I quit my job and left that guy for the second to last time, and ended up going across the country. And I realized that that's the way that I dealt with things. And so I've been on so many road trips that have occurred because of something that was going on in my life, and had a reactionary feeling. And so I hit the road. Um, and so I just made images while I was gone. I didn't think about them very much. I listened to like the same 70s like heartbreak music. I was listening to like Fleetwood Mac and the Bee Gees and like crying in my car. And so I made a lot of like very cliche images about heartbreak while I was out there. And I tried not to question any of it. I just did whatever I felt like I needed to do in that time. And so when I came back to Boston and I started looking at all the images that I'd made, I realized that I had this like whole body of work that, like photos of my hand out the window in the car and, things like that, that is kind of a ubiquitous experience when we go on road trips. And I started to realize that my personal experience of, like being brokenhearted is not a unique experience. Like everybody feels like that. And I started to kind of look at my work as straddling the line between being like super ironic and like hitting the notes of all of that heartbreak, and also kind of like dancing around it a little bit. And so I ended up putting all of this work together in a book. And the way that I sequenced it, I was thinking a lot about music because I was listening to like the same 6 songs over and over and over again. And I ended up, when I was sequencing the book, I was thinking a lot about music. And so there's a lot of repeating themes that happen through the book. So there's a lot of sunsets, and there's a lot of photos of my stereo in my car. And I ended up sequencing it kind of like a song. So I felt like there was a chorus that would happen, like every so often, and then there'd be a bridge. But the whole time, like trying to tell a non-linear story. So this is one of those images.
What what did you learn from that, from like making the book? I don't know if you've made more books, but like, is there something? We have about a little less than 10 minutes, so what did you learn from making the book that you might want to share with the audience here?
I think that I knew from the outset when I came back and I was I was like putting all this work together, I think I knew immediately that it would be a book. Like to me, that's just how it had to exist because I could control how people went through the story. Um, and so the editing process was fun. I love editing. And so I think I ended up with 200 photos and I edited from there and tried to create this non-linear narrative that ends up being kind of like an open-ended story. Like there's no end to it necessarily. Um, so this was the first book that I had made, and I'm making my second one right now. And I think that I learned to be harder on myself in terms of what images I'm going to put in the book. So the greenhouse photo that we have in the show fields curation, that actually got cut from the book, and it was my favorite image because I felt to me like it meant a lot to me, and I fought really hard to keep it in there. But at the end of the day, like I had to step back and realize that it didn't fit with the story that I was telling. And so you kind of have to be hard on yourself. And I thought a lot about, like kill your darlings. And so just because it's your favorite image doesn't mean it adds anything to the story. So get a good editor if you're not good at editing. That would be my advice. And like show your work to a lot of people and show your sequence to a lot of people. And everyone's going to have varying feedback for you. Like somebody's going to tell you to edit your book this way, someone's going to tell you to sequence your book that way. And being able to look at the way that other people are sequencing it and take out the bits that you want to keep from that advice is very valuable. So I kind of learned how to cherry pick like what I wanted from people. So that was helpful for me. So just like show your work a lot.
Do you do like physical? Like how would you do it in this day and age? Like,
so when I was doing this book, it was physical. I printed 200 like 4x5 little pictures, and I had a studio back then, and so I would just spread it all out on the studio. And for me, like editing and sequencing has always been like a very intuitive thing. And so I very quickly can start to like put together, like I know, for instance, these two images go together or these two images don't go together. And once you start building that, it's easier to go like fill stuff in as you go for me. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to do that right now. So I don't have a studio anymore. I've never really been like a studio-based photographer. I kind of just like work wherever. But trying to decide, like, should I go the route of printing things out again? Should I try to do it digitally? I played around with it on my website a little bit and, like trying to sequence it and put the text together. I still haven't decided what to do about it, so we'll see.
And do you put the text, like, do you try to write the text and then do the images, or is it like back and forth, or what's that?
It's been a little back and forth for me. So I've never had a project that I have incorporated my own writing into before. And so it took me a while to figure out how to do that. And it eventually, I was doing a lot of different things and eventually got to the point where I like took all of the writing and I was, I would write things based on photos that I'd taken. And then sometimes I would write things and then take a photo and trying to figure out how they all go together. I eventually just compiled it all into just a big Word file and started moving things around, and that kind of informed like what order the pictures went into. It has definitely been a lot more difficult working with my own text and images than just straight images. So we'll see how it goes.
That's good information to be out there in the world. Thank you. Yeah. So we have about like a little less than 5 minutes. Maybe you have some like words of inspiration or some ideas for the world out there. Anything else that you haven't said that you would like to say about you and your work?
I think just for other people making work, remembering to slow down and um, to just react to things and take pictures based on what you're feeling is a good exercise. Like, even if you don't end up doing anything with those images, I think tapping into that part of your brain that reacts to something you see immediately, you might be surprised at what comes out of that. I know I certainly was. Sometimes it feels like you're not taking pictures of anything at all. And then you happen to look back over 6 months of working and you're like, oh, wait, I have a project here and it's about this. And you can like see it all laid out in front of you. So it's kind of interesting how the brain is constantly like working in the background and you don't even realize it until the end.
So like looking back at it all, it's kind of like, oh, it makes sense now.
Yeah, I've done 2 projects like that where I felt like I would have told people that I was not making any work at all. And I would carry my camera with me around everywhere and I would like snap pictures here and there. And it wasn't until I actually sat down and like opened, Lightroom or whatever and like looked at everything in a big, like in one go that I realized that subconsciously I had been making work about something the entire time. I wasn't actively trying to make work about it, but it was just like what my brain and heart were like leading me to do. So it's always interesting for me to look back and realize, like, oh, I've been working this whole time. I just didn't realize it.
And you kept making work the whole time. It just wasn't necessarily around a subject. So I think that's like one element here is you're constantly creating. You're just not necessarily sequencing while you're doing it.
Yeah, I think having gone to art school twice and gotten a BFA and an MFA, was trained to work in a project-based way. And kind of, I felt like any image that I made that like didn't exist within a project was worthless. That's just the way that we worked. But when I got my BFA, I felt like I didn't make any work for 2 years. But the whole time I was, like I carried my camera everywhere and I was taking pictures here and there. And through those 2 years, when I stopped and I actually looked back at all the work that I had made, I was like, wait a minute. I was working on stuff. It just I wasn't pushed by a concept. And so that's been a good exercise for me to kind of like let that go and not feel bad about, like not coming up with an idea first. Like it doesn't have to be that way. You can do it however you want. There are no rules.
That's beautiful. And so for anybody else who's out there working in that manner, how do you see, oh, we have like 2 minutes left. So maybe like a 30-second thing of like what to do, how to do it, how to be the best you. What would you say to anybody else?
Oh my goodness. I think just like really listening to yourself and paying attention to the things that you react to is important to me. So for me, it was moving to Vermont, and everything here takes effort. And so I had to really want the things that I was going out to get. And I had to really want to see the people that I was seeing because it takes like an hour to drive anywhere here. I think thinking about life like that. So if you happen to move into the middle of nowhere and it took a big effort to look at things and see things and get things and talk to people, like what would still be in your life? And so that's where I'm at now.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. And thank you to everyone who's joined and commented and
Yes.
Vivian giving the emojis and everybody
Yes.
out there. Thank you for Kelly. I'm Aaron Jack. This is Artist to Art, Photographer's Portrait. Thank you for being part of my Show Fields curation that's happening Tuesday, the 25th at 5 p.m. Thank you so much. Wonderful work. Thank you for joining me on this.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Cool. All right. Take care. I'll see you soon.
Bye.